Can you imagine a situation where I have to explain to my grandchildren why the African elephant no longer exists? If we can invest our money, our aid money, properly in helping people to grow their economies sustainably, then we can make it much, much more difficult for the poachers to peddle their business.
LADbible's audience, they care passionately about illegal wildlife trade, endangered species, poaching, but quite often feel powerless to enact any change. What would you say to maybe empower or encourage LADbible's audience to become a part of tackling illegal wildlife trade?
Well, one of the reasons we're doing this is because we know that there's widespread public anger about the way in which some of our most iconic species are suffering. So, for example, we're taking through legislation to ban the sale of ivory in this country. One of the things that's helped us, because there were some people who were very wary about bringing forward this law, is that we had so many responses to a public consultation. So if you do make your voice heard, whether that's signing a petition or responding to government consultation or backing a charity like ZSL, that does make a difference, because it always helps if you can point to strong, passionate public feeling on an issue. I wouldn't say that they take the natural world for granted, but we grow up, whether it's in cities or outside it, with a sense that, you know, that's part of the backdrop of all our lives. In fact, one of the great things about the Extinct campaign is that it reinforces, and this has become widespread thanks to LADbible and others, that the natural world's in danger. That we've reached a stage where there are some species that are on the verge of extinction unless we take action. There are a range of forces that are converging on our generations, which we have a responsibility to tackle. And we know that climate change is one, and that's having an impact actually on biodiversity. But we also know that on our watch, for example, the trade in ivory is killing African elephants at a rate that is horrendous and unsustainable. Now, can you imagine a situation where I have to explain to my grandchildren why the African elephant no longer exists?
Yeah, because of inaction.
Yeah, because we haven't done our bit.
Yeah.
Even before I was Environment Minister, the greatest number of letters and emails that I would receive would be about environmental and animal welfare issues. Yeah. So, yeah, it doesn't always lead the 10 o'clock news, but it's what gets people motivated, and it's what I hope will generate more action. We're going to have an illegal wildlife trade conference, as you know, just coming up in a few weeks' time. And we want to make sure that as many people as possible feel that they can be a part of it. So it's going to be the biggest ever. And we want to try to involve people, not just those from the countries that face an existential threat to some of the species that we value, but we want to involve people in this country as well. And critically, the pressure, as you know better than me, from younger people is particularly intense and passionate and exciting as well.
Yes, yeah, and yeah, critical, as you
Yes.
say. You mentioned the conference, and what's going to be different in 2 or 4 years' time, where we can go definitively, this conference changed the way that illegal wildlife trade is being tackled?
One thing that we can do is we can spend money, and we can see how accountable we are for supporting developing nations. If we can invest our money, our aid money, properly in helping people to grow their economies sustainably, then we can make it much, much more difficult for the poachers to peddle their business. Charting the money that we spend and making sure that it's spent on bringing people out of poverty, that's one thing, because ultimately this wildlife is an asset to those countries as well. But there are economic pressures that mean that it's often more difficult for people to balance all the pressures in developing nations.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that we need to do is we need to give some thought to looking overall at the biodiversity targets that the UN helps steward. I think collectively, as a world, we've got to try and put as much emphasis on those as we have on climate change.
The illegal wildlife trade is worth between $7 and $23 billion a year. It's responsible for 20,000 elephants being poached every year for the ivory. Once you get governments to engage with the serious nature of this crime, then you might see more action. But how?
I think you're absolutely right, and there's a direct link between the flourishing nature of the illegal wildlife trade. The good thing is, I think that the people who are articulating this case best are African leaders, and for that matter, politicians in East Asia as well. And I think that what we need to do is to show that we're keeping our side of the bargain. and that we're doing everything that we can to close down the market here and to provide support for economic development, and also give a proper platform, and that's one of the things our conference is going to do, to those African leaders who are showing real leadership.
Yeah, illegal wildlife trade is part of a wider biodiversity crisis, as you've mentioned. And I mean, what is the UK government doing on these other issues that are causing this catastrophe in biodiversity loss?
Well, we're doing things both in our own country. We have targets that we're going to measure ourselves against for restoring habitats, for making sure that wildlife returns to parts of our country from which it's been driven out. But also globally, we're going to be at Cairo at the end of this year and in Beijing next year at a conference of parties on biodiversity. And one of the things that I'm very keen on is making sure that we have a trajectory for improvement in this area that we all hold ourselves to account on, which is every bit as rigorous as what we do on climate change. So we all know that we've got a commitment to reduce carbon emissions. What we also need to have is international commitments across the developing and the developed world to reverse the destruction of nature.